Hello and welcome to the next in the Effective Writing Center series of workshops. I'm Dan Gallagher, Director of the UWC. Today's workshop is titled Punctuation Re-Education, Reviewing the Rules We Often Forget, and is being presented by Mo Bishop and Kevin Folliard with material prepared by Laura Deffley. For 8 years, Mo Bishop has been a writing advisor for the UWC. She works in both synchronous and asynchronous environments. With a BA in Communications from UMUC, she also has a graduate certificate in Rhetoric and Composition from Indiana University East, where she recently earned a master's degree in English. Laura Deffley received a BA in English from the University of Illinois, where she studied and gender studies. She continued her study of literature at the University of Maryland at College Park, where she earned an MA. Laura has worked at both of her alma maters as well as at New York University. And since 2008, she has been an online writing advisor for the Effective Writing Center at UMUC. Kevin Folliard has been a writing advisor with UMUC's Effective Writing Center since 2010. He has a degree in English and creative writing from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and he has also published sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and young adult fiction. To ask a question during the broadcast, please use the chat feature in YouTube next to the viewing window. And this workshop, like all of our workshops, will be archived for future viewing in the Effective Writing Center's Google Plus community. And now to begin tonight's workshop, I will turn it over to Kevin Folliard.
Thank you, Dan. As the title states, Mo and I are going to be reviewing the punctuation rules that people often forget. In particular, we're focusing on the punctuation marks that we and other writing advisors often see students struggling with the most. In fact, we're going to be spending a disproportionate amount of time on commas in this presentation because those seem to trip up students the most. Then we'll proceed in descending order to the other punctuation marks that we see students needing assistance with, specifically semicolons, colons, and apostrophes. And the remainder of the presentation will quickly review the lesser used but still important areas of punctuation where students may need some help, but we tend to see fewer issues. The reason why people make so many comma errors is that the comma had a lot of different jobs to do in the English language. It's the most overworked punctuation mark, but most people don't understand what its responsibilities are and what it should be doing. The comma seems to be people's go-to punctuation when they think a sentence is missing something, but they're unsure what it may be. We see a lot of students who will throw a comma into a sentence in the hopes that it fixes what feels not quite right with the sentence. Thus, we want to help you understand what falls within the comma's job description, so you don't ask it to do something it's not qualified to do. You can think about it another way. You wouldn't put a bandage on healthy skin to decorate your body, so don't use a comma to decorate your sentence unless you actually need one. We've considered the most common comma errors and come up with 9 situations for you to include a comma. So only use commas when you are hanging with the fanboys, which we'll get to in a minute, beginning with prepositional phrases, keeping the non-essential separated from the essential, making lists, using coordinate, i.e. interchangeable adjectives, playing up contrast, difference, and aside or a shift, flying with free modifiers, formatting GDAT, geography, dates, addresses, and titles, or quoting dialogue. If your situation doesn't fall within one of these rules, then don't use a comma. We're going to go in depth to each of these rules to make sure that you understand what to do. And Mo is going to get us started by talking about those fanboys.
Thanks, Kevin. Let's begin by discussing the rule regarding the comma that is used with the coordinating conjunction. Use commas to separate independent clauses when they are joined by any of these 7 coordinating conjunctions. This rule is often misunderstood. For example, should there be a comma in this sentence? And what about this one? In order to understand the rule, let's discuss coordinating conjunctions and then examine what we mean by an independent clause. Coordinating conjunctions join parts of a sentence that are alike in importance and structure. They join together words, phrases, and independent clauses. The 7 coordinating conjunctions are short, simple words. They have only 2 or 3 letters. There's an easy way to remember them. They spell fanboys. For and nor, but, or, yet, so. The rule is that when a fan voice or coordinating conjunction joins two independent clauses, you place a comma before the fan voice. An independent clause is a clause that can stand alone and has a subject and verb. A compound sentence has two independent clauses. The compound comma appears in a compound sentence that has a coordinating conjunction, or what we like to call fan voice. Now, let's take a look at this rule and those two sentences I presented before. So, look at the first part of the sentence. She fixed the computer. It is an independent clause or a complete sentence. Likewise, she updated Windows is also an independent clause. Both have a subject and a verb. They are joined by the coordinating conjunction and. Therefore, a comma does go before the word and. But although the second sentence begins the same way, updated Windows is not an independent clause. It does not have a subject or verb. It does not warrant a comma. Well, Kevin, I think that covers this rule. Over to you.
Thanks, Mo. Also, a comma can indicate the end of an introductory phrase. Introductory phrases establish details that are not directly related to the main idea of the sentence. In some cases, when you have an introductory phrase that is one word in length, you may opt to leave the comma out. However, if unsure, set off descriptive introductory words with a comma. A good rule of thumb is that if you have a prepositional phrase as your opener, then you probably need to set it apart from the main action of the sentence. In the 1950s, rock and roll music was born. Across town, they have a lovely restaurant. Through careful reflection, I was able to reach a decision. Now, when a descriptive phrase leads away from the main action of the sentence, however, no commas are needed. Rock and roll music was born in the 1950s. They have a lovely restaurant across town. I was able to reach a decision through careful reflection. Now, Mo's going to explain when it's acceptable to use a pair of commas to set off clauses in a sentence.
Thanks, Kevin. A pair of commas in the middle of a sentence is used to set up clauses, phrases, and words that are not essential to the meaning of the sentence. Use one comma before to indicate the beginning of the phrase and one at the end to indicate the end of the phrase. What is non-essential phrase? A non-essential phrase means the phrase is not critical to the meaning of the sentence. In fact, you could remove the phrase and the sentence would still make sense. For example, in this first sentence, we could remove the phrase that is surrounded by commas, and the sentence would still make sense. My sister knows all about commas. But in the second sentence, the phrase, who corrected your paper, is essential in identifying which woman the writer is referring to. Remember, removing a non-essential phrase would not affect the meaning of the sentence. When there is a non-essential phrase in your writing, follow this rule and surround it with commas. Although this rule is easy to understand, many students get it wrong. In fact, if you look at this little piece of paper, you can see that not using a comma when presenting a series can skew the meaning of the sentence. What's next, Kevin?
Thanks, Mo. Next, I'm going to go over how commas should be placed between coordinate adjectives when describing a noun. So what is a coordinate adjective? It's an adjective that's on the same level as the other being used in the sentence. In other words, these adjectives coordinate their efforts to describe a noun. One is not more important than the other. They're equal. So how can you tell if your adjectives are working together? Well, first, you could try flipping the order. Does the sentence still make sense? Second, you can insert the word and between them. If the sentence still makes sense after flipping and inserting and, the adjectives can be considered coordinate. However, don't take my word for it. Let's see what this looks like in action. Look at this sentence. The writing advisor provided feedback on the student's clear, succinct draft. Does this sentence still make sense if we flip the order of the adjectives? Yes, it does. You could say the writing advisor provided feedback on the student's succinct, clear draft. Does it still make sense if we insert the word and? Sure it does. The writing advisor provided feedback on the student's clear and succinct draft. Thus, we know these adjectives are coordinating or working well together. Now it's time for Mo to tell us what to do when coordinating parts of a sentence. Contrast, as in they are noticeably different from each other.
Thanks, Kevin. Use a comma near the end of a sentence to separate contrasted coordinate elements and to indicate an aside or shift in focus. Here are a few examples. You aren't getting sick, comma, are you? He was smart, comma, almost brilliant. She was. He was entertaining, comma, even funny. This rule makes a lot of sense. How else can a comma be used, Kevin?
Well, Mo, students should also be aware that they can place commas around free modifiers. No, free modifiers is not the name of a new band. Rather, they are phrases that appear at the end of a sentence that refer back to words that appear at the beginning or in the middle of a sentence. The modifiers are described as free because they can fly around and appear anywhere in the sentence without confusing people. However, if a modifier confuses someone, like your instructor, then it's not really free. Rather, it needs to stick by the word or phrase that it refers to in the sentence. I'll show you some examples so you can see what I mean. First, let's check out this example. Jessie watched as Kirsten ran her Olympic race, crying uncontrollably. Now, who is crying uncontrollably? It's not quite clear. Thus, crying uncontrollably is not free because it needs to stick by the person it describes. The phrase could be moved to describe Jessie. Jessie, crying uncontrollably, watched as Kirsten ran her Olympic race. Or it could be moved to describe Kirsten. Jessie watched as Kirsten, crying uncontrollably, ran her Olympic race. You might ask, but how can Kirsten be the one who's crying? If she starts crying uncontrollably, how could she run the race? How could she see where she needs to run? To which I would respond, the sentence doesn't say that Kirsten runs the race well. In the previous sentence, we might have learned that Kirsten tripped and lost valuable seconds, which cost her a medal. Thus, she could be crying because she knows she won't win. Just because something or someone doesn't immediately seem like the obvious choice for the modifier, that doesn't mean there still isn't the possibility that the audience can become confused. So it's important to err on the side of caution and make it absolutely clear to the reader who or what a modifier is describing. Let's look at an example where the modifier is free to appear at the end, the middle, or the beginning of a sentence because there's no ambiguity about who it describes. In the following sentence, the modifier, loving every moment of it, appears at the end of the sentence. Because the sentence has only one person, George, who could be loving every moment of it, the reader is not likely to be confused. However, depending on your preference, the modifier could still be placed directly after George's name. Alternately, the modifier can begin the sentence. Because the reader knows for sure who you are discussing wherever that modifier is placed, it can truly fly around the sentence and land wherever the writer prefers. Hey, speaking of land, Mo is going to discuss how commas fit into geography. Take it, Mo.
Thanks, Kevin. Formatting GDATs, as Kevin calls them, means using commas to set up all geographical names, items and dates except the month and day, addresses except the street number and name, and titles and names. Wow, that was quick and easy. You're up again, Kevin.
Okay, last but not least, it's important to understand the difference between quoting sources in academic writing and creating dialogue in creative writing. In academic writing, one wants to integrate the words from a source's quote into one's paper. Thus, the goal is to make the quote part of the sentence in a seamless way. So usually commas are not used. Rather, one knows a quote is being used by the placement of the quotation marks. As can be seen, the most common citation styles used by universities in the US usually do not require commas when quoting sources. However, if you take a course in creative writing, you might be asked to create dialogue, which is a little different from academic writing. When creating dialogue within creative writing, commas are used when shifting back and forth between what a character is saying and the dialogue tags and descriptions of action. Note that the comma appears before the opening quotation mark. However, it can appear inside the closing quotation if the sentence continues. Well, we did it, Mo. We made it through the 9 scenarios in which a student would want to use commas.
Yes, we did. I think this clarifies the many uses of the comma. But before moving on to any other punctuation education, does anyone have questions?
We don't have any questions at this point, but I will keep my eye on it, and I'll remind everybody to feel free to post, and we will have another point at the end to respond to any questions.
All right, sounds good. The rest of the presentation is going to focus on common punctuation marks that students often make errors about, but none of them are quite as hardworking as the comma, and they all fit into the second half. So Mo is going to get us started by tackling semicolons.
Will do. The semicolon, the misunderstood semicolon is often misused by students. Semicolons separate 2 independent clauses. Independent clauses, as we said before, mean that they can stand alone as their own sentences. Here is an example. Students should develop a strong thesis, semicolon. It is the backbone of an essay. A semicolon can also separate 2 independent clauses, including one that starts with a transition, often a conjunctive adverb. For example, the Academy Awards was a great show, semicolon. However, the end ruined the entire presentation. You can see that in both examples, the clauses before and after the semicolon are full sentences. Demystifying the semicolon also means understanding its use as a supercomma. The semicolon is used as a supercomma in order to separate elements of a series when one or more of the elements contain commas. For example, you see that each element here is a list of 3 names, each separated by a comma. The supercomma separates these elements. Well, I think that covers the semicolon. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Mo. Colons are often used to introduce lists. In fact, students primarily use colons to perform this task. However, they often forget one key piece of information. The clause before the colon has to be a complete sentence for a colon to be used. Otherwise, if a list needs to be included in the sentence for the sentence to be complete, then you don't need a colon. In addition to lists, colons can be used after complete sentences, i.e. independent clauses, to emphasize the second independent clause in a sentence, to make a strong point, or to lead into a quotation. Now again, keep citation style rules in mind when quoting. Citation manuals trump general rules in academic papers. Now it's back to Mo, who will demystify apostrophes.
Well, Kevin, the apostrophe can be used in a few different ways. For instance, possessive nouns. Possessive nouns show ownership or possession. To indicate a possessive singular noun, add an apostrophe S. For a plural noun that ends in S, add an apostrophe. For a plural noun not ending in an S, add an apostrophe S. Likewise, for a compound noun, add an apostrophe S. Another use for apostrophes is with contractions. Contractions are shortened versions of words that use the apostrophe to replace a letter or letters. He's for he is, you've for you have, or won't for will not are just a few examples of contractions. Although we use contractions in our day-to-day speech, in the academic essay, students should write using formal tone, avoiding contractions. If you are unsure about utilizing contractions in your essay, ask your professor. Kevin, what's up next with info about quotation marks?
Glad you asked, Mo. Quotation marks should be placed around quotations. They come in pairs, so remember that the first quotation mark appears before the first word of the quote, and the closing quotation mark appears after the last word of the quote. Typically, one capitalizes the first word of a quote if an entire sentence is being quoted. When a small piece of an entire sentence or an otherwise dependent clause is being quoted, then it is unnecessary to capitalize the first word of your quote. If a quote is interrupted, like one often sees in fiction writing, one does not have to capitalize the beginning of the second quote, provided that it is continuing or completing the sentence at hand. In general, punctuation marks appear inside the closing quotation marks in the styles used within the US. In other English-speaking countries, the punctuation may appear outside the quotation marks. And in different citation styles, your punctuation might be held until after a parenthetical citation. So again, it's important to clarify with your instructor the style expectations for your course if you're uncertain. In the event that one of the sources you're quoting has a typo or a grammatical problem, you can italicize the letters SIC and place them inside brackets directly after the error to indicate that it's not your error, but the error of the original source that you're quoting. As always, please keep in mind that different citation styles have different rules, so it's important to check those rules. Now Mo will explain when and how to use hyphens.
I'd be happy to. Hyphens are used to glue words together. A compound adjective is a single adjective described by more than one word. The hyphen is used in the compound adjective to assure the meaning is understood correctly.
Thanks, Mo. A relative of the hyphen is the dash. In fact, the dash is two hyphens appearing directly after each other. Most word processing programs remove the space between them automatically when you type them. A dash has three main uses. First, in academic writing, dashes provide another way to enclose non-essential information in a sentence. As you learned earlier, commas can be used to set off non-essential info. While commas enclose information in an almost invisible way, dashes are a way to be dramatic in academic writing. They allow you to emphasize or draw attention to the information encased within them. Think of it this way. Think of the letter D. It stands for both dash and drama. Another punctuation mark that can set off non-essential info is parentheses, which Mo is going to get to shortly. While dashes are dramatic, parentheses are a quiet, subtle way to add that supplemental info. However, before Mo discusses parentheses, let's review some of the other more informal uses of dashes. In casual writing, the dash can be used as a replacement for phrases like it is or there are. However, it's best to err on the side of formality in academic writing, so do not use this informal writing technique unless the instructor is allowing students to use more informal writing conventions in an assignment. Finally, the dash can be used in fiction writing, as well as in situations where speech is transcribed, to indicate an interruption. Typically, in academic papers, you are most likely to employ that first method of using dashes to set off non-essential information in a dramatic way to call attention to it. Now, Mo will go over parentheses to explain how they can be used to set off non-essential words and phrases in a more quiet and subdued way. Take it, Mo.
Yes, it's true. You will find the parentheses in the emoticon, but more importantly, you will use them in the written text. The parentheses can be used in a numbered or lettered series or a bulleted list. According to Writing Simplified, the parentheses can enclose extra information like asides, tangents, and afterthoughts. You can remove the parenthetical and still have a structurally correct sentence. The parentheses can also be used for nouns that could be singular or plural, and they can be used for acronyms and, of course, citations.
Thanks, Mo. Brackets. They look like parentheses, and they have a similar purpose. They also add information to help the audience better understand what is being discussed. Now, unlike parentheses, brackets are used inside either parentheses or quotation marks. When placed inside parentheses, brackets add further detail to help the audience understand the paper. For instance, in APA style, if an organization is the author of a source and you first provide the organization's name inside parentheses, then place the acronym for the organization within brackets after the organization's full name, such as the CDC in this example. The placement of the acronym inside the brackets communicates to the audience that the organization shall henceforth be referred to by this acronym for the rest of the paper. When brackets are placed inside quotation marks, they are used to add contextual information. note an error in the original quote, modify quoted information slightly, or indicate that emphasis has been added. First, brackets are extremely helpful when students need to provide the audience with additional contextual information if the quote did not contain it originally. Second, as we discussed earlier, if you place the italicized letters S, I, and C inside brackets when you would like to indicate that the source you are quoting has made a typographical or grammatical error of some kind. Third, if you need to modify a quotation slightly for it to fit within your paper, you can place the information that you changed or added in brackets to indicate what is different from the original quotation. For instance, you may wish to indicate that you took a letter that was originally capitalized and made it lowercase. Please note that some citation styles do not require this information to be noted. So again, check the rules for the citation style that you're using in your course. In addition, if you need to italicize a word in quotation to draw attention to it, then please indicate the italics were added by placing italics added inside brackets. Again, keep in mind that different citation styles may wish for you to use a different phrase or no phrase at all. Again, check those rules and check with your instructor if you're not sure. The most important thing to keep in mind about brackets is that they are a way to add information to better help the audience understand what's being written about in the context of your paper. Students are most likely to use brackets to add contextual information to quoted material. Now, Mo is going to talk about how ellipses serve the opposite purpose in academic writing. They can be used to remove information from a quote or make it shorter or more succinct. Over to you, Mo.
Thanks, Kevin. While brackets can be used to expand what is sandwiched between the quotation marks, adding contextual information different than the quote, the job of the ellipses is different. It can be used to eliminate parts of a quote, subtracting what is sandwiched between the quotation marks. For example, this quote may be longer than a student needs in his or her essay. The student can eliminate part of the quote by using the ellipses. Here, you see that I subtracted a sentence from the quotation. In this case, 4 dots are used, a period and 3 ellipses, showing the missing words, which include the end of one sentence and the start of another. Also, using the ellipses punctuation may be retained to keep the author's intended meaning. Remember, the ellipses is only used within a quotation and not at the beginning or end of the sentence. Or a sentence where it could be misconstrued. A new rule in the 6th edition of the APA Publication Manual states that the ellipses should be used in references with more than 7 authors. Well, I think that covers it, Kevin. Over to you.
Thank you, Mo. Now, last but not least, there is the slash mark, which has a few different names, including slant, solidus, and virgule. All these words mean the same thing. They all refer to a mark that separates options from one another. A slash may be acceptable when writing informally to a friend or colleague, depending on your work environment. Notice that no spaces appear between the words and the slash mark. However, in formal academic writing, it's recommended that you use the word or between the 2 options instead of a slash mark. Sometimes slash marks are used to provide both singular gender pronouns. However, many people do not prefer this way of writing and would recommend making words plural to avoid the whole gender pronoun issue. Slash marks are also used to separate quoted lines of poetry. The slash marks represent the original formatting of the poem where a line break occurs. Insert spaces between the words and the slash marks in this case. As mentioned throughout the presentation, it's always important to consult the citation style that an instructor has assigned to verify that you are using punctuation correctly. For instance, MLA style typically uses slashes between poetry, but others may not. With that final reminder to always check your citation style assigned, it's back to you, Mo.
Thanks, Kevin. At this time, does anyone have any questions?
Okay, folks, we do have a comment from Joe Homan, who would appreciate your thoughts on the use of the Oxford comma.
Ooh, the Oxford comma, that's a great question. I think that the Oxford comma enhances clarity. It's a personal preference, so your one instructor might want you to use them where others may not. But typically, you're going to run into some situations where having the Oxford comma makes the sentence clearer. And for those people, anyone who's listening who's not sure what that is, the Oxford comma refers to when you have a series of items in a list, like apples, oranges, and bananas. Traditionally, you would have put a comma after all of the items, including before the and at the end of your list. Certain people prefer to take the comma out. My main thing about that is if you're going to not use an Oxford comma, that is the final comma in the list, and just let the and stand by itself or whatever other conjunction you have at the end of your list, then you need to be consistent about it throughout your entire document. But I don't know, Dan or Mo, do you have anything to add about that?
The only thing I'd have to add is you do not use the Oxford comma for AP, Associated Press, writings.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
But as a personal preference, it's consistency. I think is what matters the most.
I agree.
I think you hit the major points there. Yeah, consistency is key. I think you're very unlikely to be dinged for using an Oxford comma, whereas not using one can, as Kevin pointed out, some clarity issues. And Mo, thank you for pointing that out. The reason that Associated Press style doesn't use the Oxford comma is actually kind of a leftover from the days of trying to fit as many words as possible on a print page. And if you remove that last comma, you're saving a space that could be used for a more valuable letter. For the most part, in today's world, when the bulk of the writing that we're doing is going to be digital and distributed digitally, we don't have to worry so much about the extra spaces. So I would say, as a general rule, use that Oxford comma if you're inclined to do so. It can avoid some issues that can arise without it.
That's a really good question.
So thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you for asking that.
And I don't see any more questions right now, but I'm just going to give it another minute or two. Everybody realizes this, but as about a 4-second delay between what Kevin, Mo, and I are discussing and when YouTube broadcasts it. So we'll give everybody a half a minute or so just to type up another question if they have one. Okay, I don't see anything else coming in. So Kevin, Mo, do you want to wrap up?
Sure. That's our punctuation education. Thank you, everyone who attended. We encourage you to like the EWC Google Plus page, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel to be able to view this video, as well as other videos in our Google Hangout series. Also, if you have any questions about writing, please feel free to email the Writing Center.
And for those of you who are interested, here is a list of the sources that we used to create this presentation, which have been provided here in the following slides, which I will scroll through and allow a couple of seconds for each slide if you want to pause if you're watching this later. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mo. Thank you to everyone who watched tonight and everyone who is watching this at a later date. As we noted, please feel free to reach out to us. You can comment on the Google Plus page right below this video. You can email us. You can comment on the YouTube video, and we will get back to you as quickly as possible. More workshop in our series for this academic year and the third Thursday in May at 7 p.m. So we hope to see you then. We'll talk about research and writing. Have a good night.